I never thought I'd feel my heart skip a beat again at 67 years old. I thought that part of my life was over, buried with my dear Robert 6 months ago. But there I was, sitting across from Harold Mitchell at a small cafe table, feeling like a nervous teenager on her first date. My wedding ring, which I still wore on my left hand, felt suddenly heavy as I watched this gentle man pour cream into his coffee with the same careful attention he gave to everything else. That night, our first real night together, would change everything I thought I knew about love, loss, and second chances. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of starting over later in life. Now let me tell you what really happened. The silence in my house had become deafening. Every morning for the past 6 months, I'd wake up expecting to hear Robert's gentle snoring beside me, the soft shuffle of his slippers on the hardwood floor as he made his way to the kitchen to start the coffee. Instead, I was greeted by nothing but the hollow tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The same clock we'd bought for our 25th anniversary, thinking we had all the time in the world. My name is Margaret Reynolds, though most people call me Maggie. I'm 67 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had my life all figured out. Robert and I had been married for 42 wonderful years. We'd raised 2 beautiful children, Sarah and Michael, both now living their own busy lives in different states. We'd planned for retirement, dreamed of travel, of quiet mornings reading together on the porch swing Robert built with his own hands. Cancer had other plans. The morning of October 15th started like any other Tuesday. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold when the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, I could see Mrs. Patterson from next door, probably bringing another casserole. The freezer was already full of them, well-meaning neighbors who didn't know that food was the last thing on my mind these days. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Mrs. Patterson at all. It was Linda Chen, the volunteer coordinator from the Riverside Community Center. "Maggie," she said with a warm smile, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I know you've been going through a difficult time." I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself. "Oh, Linda, I'm sorry. I'm not really up for visitors today. Actually," she said gently, "I came to ask if you might be interested in volunteering again. I know you and Robert used to help with our literacy program before. Well, before, we really miss you both. The literacy program. Robert and I had volunteered there together for 3 years before he got sick. We'd sit side by side, helping adults learn to read, sharing quiet smiles when someone finally conquered a difficult passage. It had been one of our favorite things to do together." "I don't know, Linda. I'm not sure I'm ready to. Just think about it," she interrupted softly. "We have a new volunteer who started last month. Harold Mitchell. He's a retired English teacher. Very kind man. Lost his wife Emma about 2 years ago, so he understands. Well, he understands what you're going through." Something in her voice made me look up. "What do you mean?" "He mentioned that the hardest part isn't just the grief, it's the loneliness. The way the days stretch on with no one to share them with." Linda reached out and squeezed my hand. "Maybe you could help each other, even if it's just having someone who understands." After Linda left, I found myself wandering through the house Robert and I had called home for 28 years. Every room held memories: the living room where we'd watched countless movies together, the kitchen where he'd dance with me while dinner cooked, the bedroom where we'd talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Our children, Sarah and Michael, meant well when they called. Sarah would phone every Sunday from Seattle, her voice cheerful but strained as she updated me on her job and her husband Mark's latest promotion. Michael called less frequently from Atlanta, always sounding rushed. Always in the middle of something with his 3 young children. They both kept suggesting I should think about moving closer to one of them. But this house was all I had left of the life Robert and I built together. That evening, as I sat in Robert's favorite armchair, I still couldn't bring myself to sit anywhere else during the evening news. I found myself thinking about what Linda had said. Another widowed person who understood loneliness. For 6 months, I'd been carrying this weight alone, trying to be strong for everyone else, trying not to burden my children with my grief. Maybe, I thought, it wouldn't hurt to try volunteering again. Not because I was ready to move on. I'd never be ready for that. But because the alternative was spending another endless day counting the hours until bedtime. The next morning, I surprised myself by calling Linda back. "Linda, it's Maggie Reynolds. About the volunteering. I think I'd like to try again. Just once a week, maybe?" "Oh, Maggie! That's wonderful news." Linda's enthusiasm was infectious. "We have our book club meeting this Thursday evening. It's not just tutoring, we read and discuss books together. Harold will be there. I think you two will get along beautifully." Thursday couldn't come fast enough, and yet it couldn't come slowly enough either. I must have changed clothes 3 times, settling finally on a simple blue sweater and my comfortable black slacks. As I looked in the bathroom mirror, applying a touch of lipstick for the first time in months, I caught sight of my wedding ring. "I'm not replacing you, Robert," I whispered to my reflection. "I'm just trying to find a way to keep living without you." The community center looked exactly the same as it had a year ago, but somehow everything felt different. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter, the bulletin boards more colorful. I could hear voices and laughter coming from the meeting room where our book club gathered. I stood in the doorway for a moment, suddenly uncertain. What was I doing here? What if I couldn't contribute anymore? What if I started crying in the middle of a discussion? "You must be Maggie." I turned to find a tall man with silver hair and kind blue eyes standing beside me. He was wearing a navy cardigan over a white shirt, and when he smiled, gentle wrinkles appeared around his eyes. "I'm Harold Mitchell," he continued, extending his hand. "Linda mentioned you might be joining us tonight. I'm so glad you decided to come." His handshake was warm and firm, and something about his presence immediately put me at ease. "Thank you. I have to admit, I'm a little nervous. It's been a while since I've done anything like this." "I understand completely," he said, his voice gentle. "When I first started coming here, I spent 10 minutes in the parking lot working up the courage to walk inside. We moved into the meeting room together, where Linda welcomed me with a warm hug and introduced me to the other volunteers and participants. There were about 12 people total, ranging in age from their 30s to their 80s, all gathered around a large table with well-worn copies of the book we'd be discussing. "Tonight we're talking about The Midnight Library by Matt Haig," Linda announced. "It's about second chances and the different paths our lives might take." As the discussion began, I found myself drawn into the conversation despite my initial nervousness. The book's themes of regret, possibility, and finding meaning after loss resonated deeply with me. But what surprised me most was how thoughtful Harold's contributions were. He spoke about the book's exploration of depression and despair with an understanding that could only come from personal experience. "The protagonist's journey isn't just about choosing a different life," he said at one point, his eyes finding mine across the table. "It's about learning to value the life she actually lived, even with all its disappointments and losses." After the meeting ended, people began to filter out, chatting in small groups as they gathered their things. I was putting my copy of the book into my purse when Harold approached me. "Maggie, would you like to continue our discussion over coffee? There's a nice little cafe just down the street that stays open late." I hesitated. It had been so long since anyone had asked me to do anything social. "I don't want to keep you." "You wouldn't be keeping me?" he said with a smile. "To be honest, I'm not quite ready to go home to an empty house yet." "Are you?" His honesty caught me off guard. Most people danced around the subject of loneliness, especially when talking to a widow. But Harold's directness was refreshing, and I realized he was right. I wasn't ready to go home to the silence either. "Coffee sounds lovely," I heard myself say. The cafe was small and cozy, with warm lighting and the gentle hum of conversation from the few other patrons. Harold insisted on buying my coffee. "It's the least I can do for convincing you to stay out past your bedtime," he joked, and we found a quiet table by the window. "Linda mentioned you were an English teacher," I said, settling into my chair. "For 38 years, Harold nodded. "Mostly high school, though I did some community college courses toward the end of my career." "What about you? What did you do before retirement?" "I was a librarian at the county library for 35 years. I loved it, helping people find the books they needed, seeing children discover reading for the first time, organizing book clubs and reading programs. Librarian and an English teacher," Harold chuckled. Linda was right when she said we'd have a lot to talk about. We spent the next hour discussing books, sharing stories about our careers, and gradually, carefully, talking about our losses. Harold told me about Emma, his wife of 44 years who had died of a heart attack 2 years ago while gardening in their backyard. The hardest part, he said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully, isn't even the grief itself. It's the way your whole identity changes overnight. For 44 years I was Emma's husband. Now I'm just Harold. I knew exactly what he meant. People keep asking me how I'm doing, and I never know how to answer. Am I doing well because I got dressed today and went to the grocery store? Or am I doing poorly because I still cry in the cereal aisle when I see Robert's favorite brand? Harold reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. Both, I think. We're doing both. When we finally left the cafe, it was nearly 10 o'clock. Harold walked me to my car, and as I unlocked the door, he turned to me with a slightly nervous expression. Maggie, I hope this doesn't seem too forward, but would you like to have lunch sometime? Maybe this weekend. There's a bookstore downtown that serves sandwiches, and they usually have author readings on Saturday afternoons. I looked at this kind man standing under the streetlight, and for the first time in 6 months, I felt something other than sadness or emptiness. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it was something warmer than the cold numbness I'd been carrying. I'd like that very much, Harold. As I drove home that night, I found myself thinking about Robert, wondering what he would think about my evening. But instead of the guilt I'd expected to feel, I heard his voice in my memory, saying something he'd told me many times during our marriage. Maggie, my love, life is meant to be lived, not endured. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to start living again. Saturday morning arrived with the first real sunshine I'd noticed in weeks. I woke up earlier than usual, and for the first time in months, it wasn't because of the restless anxiety that had been my constant companion since Robert's death. Instead, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed: anticipation. I stood in front of my closet for what felt like an hour, pulling out dresses and putting them back, trying on sweaters and rejecting them. What does a 67-year-old widow wear to lunch with a man who might be becoming a friend? The question felt both ridiculous and terrifyingly important. Finally, I settled on my burgundy wool dress, the one Robert had always said brought out the color in my cheeks, and a simple pearl necklace. As I fastened the clasp, I caught myself in the mirror and almost laughed. I looked nervous and excited, like I was preparing for something significant. Don't get ahead of yourself, Maggie, I whispered to my reflection. It's just lunch between two people who understand each other's loneliness. But even as I said the words, I knew it felt like more than that. The bookstore, Chapters and More, was located in the historic downtown area, housed in a beautiful old building with tall windows and exposed brick walls. I'd been there countless times with Robert over the years, but walking through the door that afternoon felt like entering a completely new world. Harold was already there, browsing the fiction section, with a small stack of books under his arm. He was wearing dark slacks and a forest green sweater that complemented his silver hair perfectly. When he saw me, his face lit up with a smile that made something flutter in my chest. Maggie, you look lovely, he said, approaching me with that same gentle warmth I'd noticed at the cafe. I hope you don't mind, but I couldn't resist picking up a few books while I waited. It's an occupational hazard. I don't mind at all. In fact, I'm impressed by your restraint. When Robert and I used to come here, I'd usually leave with a bag full of books I didn't have room for on my shelves. We made our way to the small cafe area in the back of the store, where mismatched tables and chairs were scattered between towering bookshelves. The lunch menu was simple: sandwiches, soups, and salads, but everything smelled wonderful, and the atmosphere was warm and inviting. So tell me, Harold said after we'd ordered our lunch, what kind of books did you and Robert enjoy reading together? It was a simple question, but it opened something in me that had been closed for months. I found myself telling Harold about our Sunday morning ritual, how Robert and I would make pancakes together, then spend the afternoon reading in our living room, occasionally sharing interesting passages with each other. I told him about the mystery series we'd both become obsessed with, taking turns reading the books aloud during long car trips. He had this wonderful reading voice, I said, surprised that I could talk about Robert without the crushing weight of sadness that usually accompanied his memory. Deep and expressive. He should have been a radio announcer instead of an accountant. Harold listened with genuine interest, asking questions and sharing his own memories of reading with Emma. She was always trying to get me to read romance novels, he said with a chuckle. She'd say, Harold, you teach English literature all day. Can't you read something with a happy ending for once? Did you ever give in? Eventually. And you know what? She was right. Sometimes we all need stories that remind us that happiness is possible. There was something in the way he said it that made me look at him more closely. Is that why you joined the book club? Looking for happy endings? Harold was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands. When Emma first died, I couldn't read at all. Nothing held my attention, nothing seemed to matter. It was actually my daughter who suggested I try volunteering. She said I needed to be around people who appreciated books the way I did. How many children do you have? Just one. Rebecca. She lives about an hour away with her husband and twin girls, they're 15 now. Beautiful kids, but they think their grandfather is hopelessly old-fashioned. His eyes crinkled with affection. What about you? You mentioned 2 children. I told him about Sarah and Michael, about how they both live so far away, about the guilt I felt for not wanting to uproot my entire life to move closer to them. They mean well, but they don't understand that leaving the house I shared with Robert would feel like losing him all over again. Have you told them that? How can I? They worry about me enough already. Sarah calls every Sunday to check on me, and I can hear the concern in her voice when I tell her I've spent another week mostly by myself. Harold leaned forward slightly. Maggie, can I ask you something personal? I nodded, though I felt my heart start to beat a little faster. Do you think Robert would want you to be alone? The question caught me completely off guard. I'd been asking myself variations of it for months, but hearing it spoken aloud by someone else felt different, more real somehow. I don't know, I said honestly. We never talked about it. You never think you'll have to, you know. We always assumed we'd go together, or at least close together. The idea that one of us would have years or decades without the other never seemed real. Emma and I had that conversation once, Harold said softly. It was after her mother died, and her father was so lost without her. Emma made me promise that if something happened to her first, I wouldn't just give up. She said she'd haunt me if I stopped living. I smiled despite the seriousness of the conversation. That sounds like something Robert would say too. He was always encouraging me to try new things, to not be afraid of change. And yet here you are, trying something new by having lunch with a virtual stranger. You don't feel like a stranger, I said, surprising myself with the honesty of it. Before Harold could respond, a woman's voice came over the bookstore's sound system, announcing that the afternoon author reading was about to begin in the main area. We gathered our things and joined the small crowd assembling near a makeshift stage area. The author was a middle-aged woman named Patricia Henley, reading from her latest novel about a woman who starts over after her husband's death. As she read, I found myself completely absorbed in the story, relating to the protagonist's struggles with identity and purpose after loss. During the question and answer period, Harold raised his hand. Your protagonist talks about feeling guilty for having moments of happiness after her loss. Can you speak to that? Patricia nodded thoughtfully. I think that's one of the most universal experiences of grief, the feeling that joy somehow betrays our love for the person we've lost. But I believe the opposite is true. Choosing happiness, choosing to remain open to life's possibilities, is actually a way of honoring them. It says that the love they gave us was so powerful, it continues to sustain us even in their absence. I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness but from a kind of recognition. This was what I'd been struggling with, the fear that moving forward meant leaving Robert behind. After the reading, Harold and I walked slowly back toward our cars. The afternoon had grown cooler, and I wrapped my coat more tightly around myself. Thank you for today, I said when we reached my car. I haven't enjoyed myself this much in a very long time. Neither have I, Harold replied. Maggie, would it be too presumptuous of me to ask if you'd like to do this again? Maybe next week? I looked at this kind, patient man who somehow understood exactly what I was going through, and I felt something I thought was gone forever, hope. I'd love that, Harold. But as he started to turn away, I found myself calling after him. Harold, that author, what she said about choosing happiness, do you believe that? He turned back, his expression serious but gentle. I'm starting to, he said. With the right person to choose it with. The drive home was different from any I'd taken in 6 months. Instead of the usual heavy silence, I found myself humming along to the radio. Instead of dreading the empty house that awaited me, I was actually looking forward to having some quiet time to think about the afternoon. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Mrs. Patterson working in her garden next door. She waved enthusiastically and hurried over to my car. Maggie, you look wonderful today. There's something different about you. I thought about deflecting, about giving her a polite but vague response. Instead, I surprised us both by saying, I had lunch with a friend today, a new friend. It was really nice. Mrs. Patterson's face broke into a huge smile. Oh, how wonderful! Robert always said you were too social to spend so much time alone. That evening, as I sat in the living room with a cup of tea and one of the books Harold had recommended, I found myself talking to Robert the way I used to when he was alive. I met someone today, Rob, I said softly to the empty room. A good man. Kind and gentle like you. He makes me laugh, and more importantly, he makes me feel like myself again. Not just the widow everyone tiptoes around, but Maggie. The woman you fell in love with all those years ago. I paused, free listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me. I'm not trying to replace you. No one ever could. But maybe there's room in a heart that's loved as deeply as I loved you for something new. Something different, but still real. For the first time since Robert's death, the silence in the house didn't feel oppressive. It felt peaceful, like a gentle permission to keep moving forward. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror and was startled by what I saw. The woman looking back at me had color in her cheeks and a spark in her eyes that had been missing for months. I looked. I realized with wonder, like someone who was beginning to live again. Over the next 3 weeks, Harold and I fell into a comfortable rhythm. We'd meet after each Thursday book club meeting for coffee, and he'd suggested we start taking walks together on Sunday afternoons. Emma always said I needed more exercise. He'd told me with that gentle smile of his, and it seems wrong to keep disappointing her now. Our walks became the highlight of my week. We'd explore different neighborhoods, sometimes stopping at small cafes or antique shops, always talking. Harold was an excellent listener, but more than that, he was someone who understood the strange territory of building a new life on the foundation of an old one. It was during our third Sunday walk that I realized how much my world had changed in less than a month. We were strolling through Riverside Park, the leaves just beginning to show their autumn colors, when Harold stopped suddenly at a bench overlooking the duck pond. This was Emma's favorite spot, he said quietly. We used to bring our daughter here when she was little. Rebecca would feed the ducks while Emma and I planned our dreams on this very bench. I expected to feel awkward, the way I usually did when people mentioned their deceased spouses around me. Instead, I felt honored that he'd shared something so personal. What kind of dreams? I asked. Oh, the usual ones. Travel, watching Rebecca grow up, growing old together. He sat down on the bench and patted the space beside him. The funny thing is, I was so focused on the big dreams that I almost missed how perfect the small moments were. Sunday afternoons like this, reading the paper together, Emma humming while she cooked dinner. I settled beside him, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. Robert used to say that happiness wasn't something you pursued, it was something you noticed. I didn't understand what he meant until after he was gone. Now I realize he was talking about exactly what you just described. Do you think, Harold said, turning to look at me, that it's possible to have those moments again? Not the same ones, but new ones that matter just as much. Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my daughter Sarah's name, and I felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. She wasn't due to call until tomorrow? I should take this, I told Harold apologetically. Mom, Sarah's voice sounded tense. I've been trying to reach you all afternoon, Mrs. Patterson called me. My heart sank. Mrs. Patterson, well, meaning as she had a tendency to worry about everyone in the neighborhood. What did she tell you? She said you've been going out a lot lately. With a man? Mom, is that true? I looked at Harold, who was pretending to study the ducks while clearly trying to give me privacy. Sarah, I've made a friend. His name is Harold and we both volunteer at the community center. We've had coffee a few times and gone for walks. That's all. Mom, it's only been 6 months since Dad died. Don't you think it's a little soon to be dating? The word dating hit me like a physical blow. We're not dating, Sarah. We're two lonely people who enjoy each other's company. I'm just worried about you, Sarah said, her tone softening slightly. You're vulnerable right now, and there are people who might take advantage of that. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. Harold isn't taking advantage of me, Sarah. He's a widower himself. He understands what I'm going through. That's even worse, Mom. Two grieving people can enable each other's problems instead of healing properly. I closed my eyes, trying to keep my voice calm. Sarah, I appreciate your concern, but I'm a grown woman. I think I can judge whether someone is good for me or not. There was a long pause before Sarah spoke again. Uncle Jim called me last night. My stomach dropped. Jim was Robert's younger brother, and while he'd been supportive immediately after the funeral, I'd sensed his disapproval when I'd stopped attending the family gatherings that had become too painful. What did Uncle Jim want? He's worried about you too. He said Robert's memory deserves better than you running around town with the first man who shows you attention. The cruelty of the statement took my breath away. I looked at Harold, this kind, patient man who had brought light back into my world, and felt something fierce rise up in my chest. Sarah, I'm going to hang up now. When you're ready to speak to me with respect about my life choices, you can call me back. I ended the call with shaking hands and immediately turned off my phone. Maggie, Harold said gently, are you all right? I realized I was crying, not the gentle tears of grief I'd grown accustomed to, but angry, frustrated tears. I'm sorry. My daughter. She heard we've been spending time together, and she's not happy about it. Harold handed me a handkerchief from his coat pocket. Would you like to talk about it? I told him about the conversation, about Jim's harsh words delivered through Sarah, about the feeling that I was somehow betraying Robert by allowing myself to enjoy Harold's company. Maybe they're right, I said miserably. Maybe it is too soon. Maybe I am being disrespectful to Robert's memory. Harold was quiet for a long moment, watching the ducks glide across the pond. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful but firm. Maggie, can I tell you something Emma said to me about a month before she died? I nodded, wiping my eyes with his handkerchief. She was having a good day. The cancer gave us a few of those near the end. We were sitting in our garden, and she said, Harold, I need you to promise me something. When I'm gone, don't you dare spend the rest of your life mourning me. Find someone who makes you laugh the way I did. Find someone who appreciates your terrible jokes and your obsession with correcting people's grammar. Because if you don't, I'll have failed at the most important job I ever had. What job was that? I asked softly. Teaching you how to be happy? Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks, but these were different. They felt cleansing somehow, like rain after a long drought. Emma sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. And you know what? I think she would have liked you very much. Harold turned to face me fully. Maggie, I don't know what this is between us. Maybe it's just friendship. Maybe it's something more. But I know that spending time with you has made me feel alive again in a way I didn't think was possible. If that's wrong, if that's somehow disrespectful to our spouse's memories, then I guess I'll have to live with being wrong. I looked at this man who had somehow become so important to me in such a short time, and I made a decision. Harold, would you like to come to my house for dinner this week? Nothing fancy, just a home-cooked meal. I realize we've been meeting in public places, and I think I'd like you to see where I live, where Robert and I lived. His eyes lit up with surprise and pleasure. I would be honored, Maggie. Wednesday evening, around 6, perfect. Can I bring anything? Just yourself, I said, and meant it. As we walked back to our cars, I felt a strange mixture of nervousness and determination. Inviting Harold to the house felt like a significant step, though I wasn't entirely sure toward what. But Sarah's call had clarified something for me. I was tired of living my life according to other people's expectations of how a widow should behave. That evening I called my son Michael in Atlanta. Unlike Sarah, he listened quietly as I told him about Harold, about our friendship, about the judgment I was facing from some family members. Mom, he said when I finished, do you remember what you told me when Jessica and I were having problems last year? Jessica was Michael's wife, and they'd gone through a rough patch when their youngest was born. I told you that marriage isn't about making other people happy with your choices. It's about two people deciding to build a life together, regardless of what anyone else thinks. Exactly. And you know what? The same principle applies to whatever this is with Harold. If he makes you happy, if he treats you well, then everyone else's opinions don't matter, even if it's only been 6 months since your father died. Michael was quiet for a moment. Mom, I miss Dad every day. He was an incredible father and husband. But you know what he always said about you? What? That you had too much love in your heart to waste it on grief alone. He used to say that your capacity for love was one of the things that made him fall for you in the first place. After we hung up, I sat in Robert's chair, though I was beginning to think of it as simply the chair, and considered what lay ahead. Wednesday would be the first time I'd cooked dinner for a man other than Robert in over 40 years. The thought was terrifying and exciting in equal measure. I looked around the living room, seeing it as Harold might see it for the first time. The family photos on the mantelpiece, Robert's book still on his side table. The Afghan Emma had knitted for our last anniversary draped over the back of the sofa. This house was a museum of my life with Robert, but maybe, I thought, it didn't have to be a mausoleum. Maybe it could be a place where the past was honored but the future was welcome too. For the first time in months, I began planning a menu. Wednesday arrived with a mixture of autumn rain and unexpected warmth. I spent the morning cleaning house with more energy than I'd felt in months. Dusting surfaces that hadn't seen attention since Robert's funeral, arranging fresh flowers from the grocery store in the vase we'd received as a wedding gift 42 years ago. By afternoon, I was second-guessing everything. The menu I'd planned, Robert's favorite pot roast with vegetables, suddenly seemed too intimate, too loaded with memory. But it was too late to change course, and besides, it was the meal I knew I could cook well even with nervous hands. At 5:30, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, wearing the same burgundy dress I'd worn to our bookstore lunch. My hands shaking slightly as I fastened my pearl earrings. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger flushed with anticipation, alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. "You can do this, Maggie," I told my reflection. "It's just dinner with a friend." But even as I said it, I knew it felt like much more. Harold arrived precisely at 6, carrying a bottle of wine and a small bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums. When I opened the door, he stood there for a moment, taking in my appearance with an expression that made my heart skip. "You look beautiful, Maggie," he said simply, and I believed him. "Thank you. Please, come in," as Harold stepped into my foyer. I watched him take in his surroundings with the careful attention I'd come to associate with him. His eyes moved over the family photos lining the hallway, the coat closet where Robert's jacket still hung, the small table where we'd always kept our car keys. "What a lovely home," he said, handing me the flowers. "It feels warm." "Lived in." I led him into the living room, suddenly hyper-aware of every detail through his eyes. Robert's favorite chair, positioned at the perfect angle for watching television. The bookshelf filled with mysteries and biographies we'd collected over decades. The wedding photo on the mantelpiece, showing a young couple who had no idea what lay ahead of them. Harold moved slowly around the room, pausing at the bookshelf. "You have excellent taste in literature," he said, running his finger along the spine of one of Robert's favorite novels. "I see we share several favorite authors." Robert was the reader in the family, actually. I was more practical: cookbooks, gardening guides, the occasional romance novel I'd hide from him. I surprised myself by laughing at the memory. He caught me reading one once and teased me about it for weeks. Then I found him finishing it the next day. Smart man. He knew that understanding what you loved was important. There was something in Harold's tone that made me look at him more closely. He was still studying the bookshelf, but I sensed he was really studying me, trying to understand the life I'd built with Robert. "Would you like some wine?" I asked. "Dinner won't be ready for another 20 minutes. "That sounds perfect." In the kitchen, I busied myself opening the wine while Harold sat at the small breakfast table where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals. The domesticity of the moment, Harold sitting in what had been Robert's chair, the smell of dinner cooking, the warm light filtering through the curtains, was both comforting and overwhelming. "Can I help with anything?" Harold asked. "Just keep me company. I'm afraid I'm a little nervous. It's been a long time since I've cooked for anyone other than myself." "How long?" The question was gentle, but it opened something in me that I hadn't expected. The last dinner I cooked was the night before Robert went into the hospital for the final time. He could barely eat by then, but he insisted on sitting at this table with me, making conversation about the neighbors and the weather, pretending everything was normal. I stopped, embarrassed by the sudden tremor in my voice. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I told you that." Harold reached across the small table and covered my hand with his. "Because it mattered. Because he mattered. And because pretending he didn't exist would be dishonest." I looked down at our joined hands, his weathered from years of gardening, mine soft from months of dessous, and felt something shift inside me. "Don't you find it strange, talking about our spouses with each other?" At first, I thought I would. But I've realized something over these past weeks. Harold's thumb traced gently across my knuckles. "Loving someone deeply doesn't end when they die. It becomes part of who you are. Emma is part of who I am, just as Robert is part of who you are." If we're going to know each other, really know each other, then we need to know those parts too. The timer for the oven chose that moment to ring, breaking the intensity of the moment but not its meaning. As I moved around the kitchen, preparing our plates, Harold told me about the first meal he'd cooked after Emma died. It was scrambled eggs, he said with a self-deprecating laugh. Emma had always done the cooking, and I realized I didn't even know how to make a proper omelette. I burned the first 3 attempts and finally gave up and ate cereal for dinner. What changed? My daughter. Rebecca came over one weekend about a month after the funeral and found my refrigerator full of takeout containers and my pantry empty. She sat me down and said, "Dad, Mom would be horrified if she knew you were living on fast food. She'd want you to take care of yourself." Harold smiled at the memory. So Rebecca taught me to cook. Basic things at first, then gradually more complicated meals. It became our bonding time. As we sat down to dinner, Harold raised his wine glass. "To new friendships," he said, "and the courage to keep our hearts open, to second chances," I replied, clinking my glass against his. The meal passed easily, our conversation flowing from books to travel dreams to childhood memories. Harold told me about his years as a teacher, about the students who had touched his life, about the retirement he and Emma had planned but never got to enjoy together. I found myself sharing stories about the library, about the programs Robert and I had developed together, about the dreams we'd had to explore the world after his retirement. "Do you still want to travel?" Harold asked as I served dessert, apple pie I'd made from scratch, the first time in months. "I don't know." Robert and I had planned to visit Ireland for our 45th anniversary. We'd researched bed and breakfasts, mapped out scenic drives, even started learning about genealogy to trace his family roots. I set down his plate, avoiding his eyes. It feels wrong to go without him, but it also feels wrong to let the dream die just because he's not here to share it. What if you didn't have to choose between those options? I looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Harold set down his fork and looked at me seriously. "What if there was a third option? What if you could honor the dream you shared with Robert by still pursuing it, but not necessarily alone?" My heart began beating faster. "Harold, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'd love to see Ireland too. I'm saying that Emma always wanted to visit Scotland, and they're right next door to each other. I'm saying that maybe we could turn two people's unfulfilled dreams into one shared adventure." The suggestion hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility and implication. I could feel myself standing at a crossroads, the safe path of continued solitude stretching in one direction, and an uncertain but potentially beautiful path stretching in the other. "That's a big step," I said quietly. "It doesn't have to be. We could start smaller, a weekend trip somewhere closer. See how we travel together, whether we drive each other crazy or discover we make good companions." I thought about it as we finished dessert, the idea both thrilling and terrifying. When had I become so afraid of taking risks? Robert and I had been adventurous when we were young, driving to new cities on a whim, trying restaurants we couldn't afford, dreaming bigger than our circumstances suggested we should. After dinner, Harold insisted on helping with the dishes, and we stood side by side at the sink. Our movements synchronized in a way that felt surprisingly natural. As he dried the last plate, he turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Maggie, can I ask you something personal?" I nodded, though my pulse quickened. "Are you happy? I mean, truly happy, not just getting by or managing your grief. Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, moving through empty days like a ghost, marking time until bedtime. Free, then I thought about the woman I'd become over these past weeks, someone who looked forward to Thursday evenings and Sunday walks, someone who hummed while cooking dinner for a friend. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty of it. "I am happy. Not the same kind of happy I was with Robert, but genuinely happy nonetheless." Harold smiled, and there was something triumphant in his expression. "Good. Because you deserve to be happy, Maggie. You deserve to have someone who looks forward to seeing you, who thinks about you when you're not together, who wants to share both adventures and quiet evenings with you." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the laugh lines around his kind eyes. "Because that's how I feel about you." My breath caught in my throat. We stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the comfortable debris of a shared meal, and I realized that this moment had been building since that first night at the cafe. All our conversations, all our careful revelations, All our growing comfort with each other had led to this. Harold, I whispered, not sure what I wanted to say. I know it's complicated, he said gently. I know we're both carrying the weight of long marriages and deep losses. I know your family has concerns, and mine might too. But Maggie, I haven't felt this way about anyone since Emma, and I don't want to pretend that's not significant. I reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the slight roughness of his evening stubble, the warmth of his skin. It is significant. It's terrifying and wonderful and significant. We stood there for a long moment, the kitchen filled with a charged quiet. Then Harold leaned down and kissed my forehead, gentle and sweet and full of promise. I should go? He said softly. But Maggie, I hope you'll think about what I said. About traveling, about taking risks, about letting yourself be happy. After he left, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea, replaying every moment of the evening. The house felt different somehow, not empty, but full of possibility. Harold's presence lingered in the air, in the wine glasses we'd shared, in the easy laughter that had filled my kitchen for the first time in months. I looked at the wedding photo on the mantelpiece, at the young couple who had loved each other so completely for so many years. What do you think, Rob? I said aloud. Am I ready for this? Am I brave enough? The house was quiet, but for the first time, the silence felt like permission rather than emptiness. Tomorrow, I decided, I would call Harold. Tomorrow, I would say yes to whatever adventure he was offering. Tonight, I would simply sit with the remarkable realization that my heart was still capable of opening, still capable of love. I woke up Thursday morning with Harold's words echoing in my mind. You deserve to have someone who looks forward to seeing you. The sentiment was beautiful, but in the bright light of morning, it also felt overwhelming. What did it mean to deserve happiness at 67? What did it mean to start over when you thought your story was already complete? I was still pondering these questions when my phone rang at 9 o'clock. The caller ID showed Sarah's name, and my stomach immediately tightened. We hadn't spoken since our argument about Harold 3 days ago. Hi, Mom. Sarah's voice was carefully controlled, the tone she used when she was trying very hard to be reasonable. I wanted to apologize for how our conversation ended on Sunday. I was out of line. Thank you for saying that, I said cautiously. But Mom, I've been thinking about what you said about this Harold person, and I'm still worried. I did some research online. Did you know that widowed women are particularly vulnerable to financial scams? There are men who specifically target. Sarah, stop. I cut her off more sharply than I'd intended. Harold is not scamming me. He's a retired English teacher who volunteers at the community center. We've had coffee and gone for walks. He's never asked me for money or anything else inappropriate. I know you don't want to hear this, but Uncle Jim is planning to come visit this weekend. He's concerned about some of the decisions you've been making. My heart sank. Jim was Robert's younger brother, and while he meant well, he had very firm ideas about how widows should behave. He'd been horrified when I'd stopped attending the monthly family dinners at his house, claiming I was isolating myself. Now, apparently, he was equally horrified that I wasn't isolating myself enough. What exactly has Jim heard? Or Mrs. Patterson mentioned to Aunt Carol that you've been going out with a man? You know how news travels in this family. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of other people's expectations settling on my shoulders. Sarah, I'm a grown woman. I don't need Jim's permission to have friends. He's just looking out for you, Mom. We all are. Dad's only been gone 6 months. I'm aware of how long it's been, I said quietly. I'm also aware that I have to figure out how to live the rest of my life. And I'm sorry if that makes everyone uncomfortable. But I can't spend the next 20 years sitting in this house grieving just to make other people feel better about their own expectations. There was a long silence before Sarah spoke again. Mom? Are you in love with this man? The question hit me like a physical blow, partly because I wasn't prepared for it, and partly because I didn't know the answer. Was what I felt for Harold love, or was it simply gratitude for his companionship, relief at feeling less alone? I don't know, I said honestly, but I know he makes me feel alive again. I know I look forward to seeing him in a way I didn't think I'd ever look forward to anything again. And I know that Robert would want me to choose happiness over endless mourning. How can you be so sure about what Dad would want? Because I was married to him for 42 years, Sarah. Because I knew him better than anyone else in the world. And because he told me, more than once, that he wanted me to keep living if something happened to him. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table feeling drained and conflicted. Part of me wanted to call Harold and tell him that this was all too complicated, that the judgment and family drama weren't worth it. But another part of me, a stronger part, was angry at the idea that other people should dictate how I grieved, or when I was allowed to find companionship again. I was still wrestling with these feelings when the doorbell rang at 10:30. Through the window, I could see Harold standing on my porch, holding 2 coffee cups and looking uncertain. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," he said when I opened the door. "I brought coffee from that little shop you mentioned liking, and I wanted to make sure last night wasn't too much." I lay awake worrying that I'd overstepped. Looking at his kind, concerned face, I felt some of the tension from Sarah's call begin to dissolve. "You didn't overstep. Come in, please." We sat in the living room, and I found myself telling him about Sarah's call, about Jim's planned visit, about the family's growing concern over my friendship with Harold. He listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful as I spoke. "Maggie," he said when I finished, "I need you to know something. I care about you too much to be the cause of problems with your family. If my presence in your life is creating more pain than joy, then maybe we should step back." The suggestion should have been reassuring evidence of his consideration and respect for my relationships with my children. Instead, it made me realize how much I'd come to depend on his presence in my life. "Is that what you want?" I asked. "No," he said without hesitation. "It's the last thing I want. But I also don't want you to have to choose between your family and our friendship. What if I don't want to step back? What if I want to move forward, despite the complications?" Harold set down his coffee cup and moved closer to me on the sofa. "Then I'd be honored to move forward with you. But Maggie, I need you to be absolutely certain. Because if we take this next step, if we acknowledge that what we feel for each other is more than friendship, then there's no going back to the safe distance we've been maintaining." I thought about what he was asking. For weeks, we'd been dancing around the growing intimacy between us, calling it friendship while knowing it was something deeper. Harold was offering me the chance to name it, to claim it, to stop pretending that what we shared was merely companionship between 2 lonely people. "What would that next step look like?" I asked. Harold's eyes were serious as he considered his answer. "It would look like honesty, with ourselves and with other people. It would look like making plans together, not just for next week but for next month, next season. It would look like introducing each other to the important people in our lives as more than friends." He paused, reaching for my hand. "And eventually, if we both want it, it might look like not spending every night in separate houses, wondering what the other person is doing." The implication of his words sent a flutter of nervousness and excitement through me. "Harold, since Robert died, I haven't even thought about—" "I know. Neither have I, not since Emma. But Maggie, I've started thinking about it with you. About what it would be like to wake up next to someone who cares about me, to share breakfast and evening news and all the small intimacies of daily life." I felt tears prick my eyes, though I wasn't sure if they were from sadness or overwhelming emotion. "It's terrifying, it is. But would you rather be terrified and alive, or safe and empty?" Before I could answer, we were interrupted by the sound of a car in my driveway. Through the window, I could see a familiar blue sedan, and my heart sank. "It's Jim," I said, "Robert's brother. He's early." Harold immediately stood up. "I should go?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than I'd intended. "No, Harold, I'm tired of hiding our friendship like it's something shameful. If Jim wants to judge me for having coffee with a friend in my own living room, then that's his problem." Harold looked uncertain. "Maggie, are you sure? I don't want to make things more difficult with your family. My family needs to accept that I'm going to make my own decisions about my life." I opened the door before Jim could knock, and saw his expression shift from surprise to disapproval as he noticed Harold's car in the driveway. "Hello, Jim. You're early, Maggie." Jim's greeting was stiff as he stepped into the foyer, his eyes taking in Harold's presence with obvious displeasure. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all. Jim, I'd like you to meet Harold Mitchell." "Harold, this is Jim Reynolds, Robert's brother." Harold stepped forward with his hand extended. "It's good to meet you, Mr. Reynolds." Robert was fortunate to have such a caring family. Jim shook Harold's hand with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand you've been spending quite a bit of time with my sister-in-law recently." The disapproval in Jim's voice was unmistakable, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. "Harold, however, remained perfectly composed. I have. Maggie and I volunteer together at the community center, and we've become good friends. She's a remarkable woman. I can see why your family wants to look out for her. Yes. Well, Robert's been gone less than 6 months. Some of us feel that Maggie might benefit from taking more time to process her grief before forming new attachments. The euphemism hung in the air like an accusation. I felt Harold tense beside me, but when he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. Grief is a deeply personal process, Mr. Reynolds. I lost my wife Emma 2 years ago, so I understand how complicated it can be. But I've also learned that healing doesn't follow a prescribed timeline, and that companionship can be part of the healing process rather than a distraction from it. Jim's expression hardened. With all due respect, Mr. Mitchell, you didn't know my brother. Robert and Maggie had a very special marriage. It's not something that should be replaced lightly. I would never presume to replace what Maggie had with Robert, Harold replied quietly. Their love was obviously profound and lasting, but I also don't believe that honoring that love requires Maggie to spend the rest of her life alone. That's enough, I said, stepping between them. My voice was shaking with anger and embarrassment. Jim, I appreciate your concern, but Harold is absolutely right. How I choose to heal, how I choose to live my life, and who I choose to spend time with are my decisions to make. Jim turned to me with an expression of hurt disappointment. Maggie, Robert wouldn't want this. He'd be horrified to see you with another man so soon after his death. The accusation hit me like a slap. For a moment, I was speechless, overwhelmed by the cruelty of using Robert's memory as a weapon against my happiness. It was Harold who broke the silence. Mr. Reynolds, I never had the privilege of knowing Robert. But from everything Maggie has told me about him, he sounds like a man who loved her deeply and wanted her to be happy. I find it hard to believe that a man with that much love would want the woman he cherished to spend the rest of her life grieving him instead of living. Jim looked between Harold and me, his face flushed with anger. I can see I'm not welcome here anymore. Maggie, I hope you'll reconsider this relationship before you do something you'll regret. Robert deserved better than to be forgotten so quickly. After Jim left, I collapsed onto the sofa, shaking with emotion. Harold sat beside me and pulled me into his arms, letting me cry against his shoulder. I'm so sorry, I said when I could speak again. That was horrible. He had no right to speak to you that way, or to use Robert against me like that. Is protecting his brother's memory the only way he knows how? Harold said gently. It doesn't make it right, but I understand it. I pulled back to look at him. How can you be so understanding? He was awful to you. Harold cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away my tears. Because I care more about you than I do about his disapproval. Because I know that what we have is real and good and worth defending. And because, Maggie, I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung between us, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. I looked into Harold's eyes and saw everything I'd been afraid to acknowledge, the depth of feeling that had been growing between us, the possibility of love after loss, the courage it would take to choose happiness despite other people's judgment. I think I'm falling in love with you too, I whispered. Harold kissed me then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. So what do we do now? I asked. Now, Harold said, we decide to be brave. We decide that love at any age is worth fighting for. And we stop letting other people's fears dictate our choices. I thought about the poetry reading he'd mentioned weeks ago, about his suggestion that we travel together, about all the possibilities that lay ahead of us if we had the courage to reach for them. Harold, I said, you mentioned a poetry reading once. Is the invitation still open? He smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. Are you sure? It would be our first official date. People might talk. Let them talk, I said, surprising myself with my certainty. I'm 67 years old, and I've just realized I'm not done living yet. Then yes, Maggie Reynolds, I would be honored to take you on our first official date. As we made plans for Friday evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: excitement about the future. There would be more family drama, more judgment, more challenges to face. But sitting there with Harold, planning our first real date, I realized that some things were worth fighting for. Love, I was learning, was definitely one of them. Friday evening arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything feel possible. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the neckline of my navy dress, the one I'd bought for Robert's retirement party, but never had the chance to wear. Tonight felt like the right occasion for it. Like I was finally ready to step into the future we'd planned but couldn't share. Harold was picking me up at 6:30 for the poetry reading, followed by dinner at a restaurant he'd chosen. Somewhere special, he'd said with a smile that made my heart flutter like a teenager's. At 67, I was going on my first real date in over 40 years. The doorbell rang precisely on time. And when I opened the door, Harold stood there holding a single yellow rose, wearing a charcoal gray suit that made his silver hair look distinguished and his blue eyes more vibrant than ever. "You look absolutely stunning, Maggie," he said, offering me the rose with a smile that was both nervous and delighted. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." I took the rose, inhaling its delicate fragrance. "Let me just put this in water." In the kitchen, as I placed the rose in a small vase, I caught sight of my wedding photo on the refrigerator. Robert and me on our wedding day, young and radiant, and so sure we'd have forever. For a moment, I expected the familiar pang of guilt. But instead I felt something different. Gratitude. Gratitude for the love I'd had, and gratitude for the possibility of love again. "Ready?" Harold asked from the doorway, and I realized he'd been watching me with understanding in his eyes. "Ready," I said, and meant it. The poetry reading was being held at the Riverside Arts Center, a beautifully renovated Victorian mansion downtown. As Harold helped me out of his car, I noticed several couples our age heading toward the entrance, and I felt a surge of confidence. We weren't the only people choosing to live fully at this stage of life. The reading room was intimate, with about 50 chairs arranged in semicircles facing a small stage. Harold had reserved seats near the front, and as we settled in, he leaned close enough that I could smell his cologne. "I should probably warn you," he said quietly. "The poet tonight is known for writing about love and loss." I thought it might speak to us. Before I could respond, the lights dimmed and a woman in her 50s took the stage. Margaret Atwood, not the famous one, she clarified with a laugh, but a local poet who shared the name began reading from her latest collection, After the Storm. Her first poem was about the death of a long marriage, and I felt Harold's hand find mine in the darkness. But as she continued, her work shifted to themes of renewal, of finding beauty after devastation, of hearts that learned to open again after being shattered. Then she read a poem that seemed written specifically for us. "They say the heart has only so much love to give, as if affection were rationed, finite, as if loving again meant loving less before. But I have learned that hearts are not bank accounts, that love given freely multiplies rather than diminishes, that honoring the past can mean embracing the future, that saying yes to joy is not betrayal but courage." I felt tears sliding down my cheeks, and when I glanced at Harold, I saw that his eyes were bright with unshed tears as well. He squeezed my hand gently, and I squeezed back, both of us understanding that we were hearing our own story told in verse. During the intermission, we stepped outside for some air. The evening was cool and clear, with the first stars beginning to appear overhead. "That poem," I said softly. It felt like she was speaking directly to us. "I know, when she talked about hearts not being bank accounts, about love multiplying rather than diminishing." Harold turned to face me fully. "Maggie, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about Robert wanting you to be happy. I think Emma would feel the same way. I think she'd like knowing that her love taught me how to recognize love when I found it again." We were standing under a streetlight, and I could see the sincerity in Harold's expression, the vulnerability of a man who had chosen to risk his heart again at 70. "Harold," I said, reaching up to touch his cheek, "I want you to know something. When I look at you, when I think about us, I don't feel like I'm betraying Robert's memory. I feel like I'm honoring the capacity for love he helped me discover." Harold kissed my palm, then leaned down to kiss my forehead, my cheeks, and finally gently my lips. It was our second kiss, but the first that felt like a promise. When we returned to our seats for the second half of the reading, something had shifted between us. We sat closer together, Harold's arm around my shoulders, my hand resting on his knee. We looked, I realized, like a couple, like two people who belonged together. The restaurant Harold had chosen was called the Garden Room, a small, elegant place with soft lighting and fresh flowers on every table. The maitre d' greeted Harold by name and seated us at a corner table with a view of the restaurant's herb garden. "You've been here before?" I observed as we settled in. Harold looked slightly embarrassed. "Once. About a month ago, actually. I was driving by and saw it, and I thought it was the kind of place I'd like to bring you someday." The confession touched me deeply. You were planning this a month ago. I was hoping. There's a difference. Harold reached across the table for my hand. Maggie, I need you to understand something. I haven't felt this way about anyone since Emma died. For 2 years, I went through the motions of living without really feeling alive. Then I met you and everything changed. Over dinner, we talked about everything and nothing, books we'd loved, places we wanted to see, memories from our marriages that we could finally share without pain. Harold told me about Emma's garden, how she'd known the names of every flower and had taught him to appreciate the changing seasons through her eyes. I told him about Robert's terrible jokes, how he'd made me laugh even during the hardest times of our marriage. Do you think they would have liked each other? I asked. Emma and Robert. Harold considered this seriously. I think Emma would have loved Robert's sense of humor, and I think Robert would have appreciated Emma's kindness. Yes, I think they would have been friends. I'm glad, I said. It makes this feel less complicated. As we lingered over dessert and coffee, Harold became more serious. Maggie, I have something I want to ask you, but I don't want you to feel pressured to answer tonight. My heart began to beat faster. What is it? I've been thinking about what I said yesterday, about not spending every night in separate houses. I know it's soon, I know there are practical considerations and family concerns to think about, but I wonder, would you consider the possibility of us living together? Not immediately, but eventually when you feel ready. The question hung in the air between us, momentous and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Living together would mean more than companionship or even romance. It would mean building a life together, blending our histories and our futures into something new. Are you asking me to move in with you, or are you thinking of moving in with me? I asked, trying to buy time to process what he was suggesting. I'm open to either option. My house has Emma's stamp on it everywhere, just as yours has Robert's. We could start fresh in a new place, or one of us could make room for the other's history. What matters to me isn't where we live, but that we live together. I thought about my house, about the rooms filled with memories of my life with Robert. Then I thought about the loneliness that had filled those rooms since his death, about the way Harold's presence had made them feel warm and alive again. I need time to think about it, I said honestly. It's not that I don't want to, it's that I want to be sure I'm making the decision for the right reasons. Of course. Take all the time you need. This isn't something to rush into. But as we drove home, I realized I didn't need as much time as I'd thought. Harold walked me to my door, and as I unlocked it, he turned to me with that gentle smile that had become so dear to me. Thank you for tonight, Maggie. For the poetry for dinner. For being brave enough to take this step with me. Thank you for asking me. For being patient with my fears and my family drama and my confusion about what it means to love someone again. Harold cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones. There's no confusion in my mind, Maggie. I love you. Not as a replacement for Emma, not as a way to avoid loneliness, but as the remarkable woman you are. I love your laugh, your intelligence, your capacity for kindness even when people disappoint you. I love the way you make me want to be worthy of your affection. Oh, Harold. I felt tears spilling down my cheeks again, but these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. I love you too. I love your patience, your wisdom, your ability to see the best in people even when they're not at their best. I love the way you make me feel like I'm still the woman I was before grief nearly buried her. He kissed me then, and it was different from our earlier kisses. This one was deeper, more passionate, full of promise and commitment, and the recognition that we were no longer testing the waters of attraction, we were diving into the deep end of love. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathless. Harold, I said, my decision crystallizing in that moment, I don't need more time to think about your question. He looked at me with hope and anticipation. No. The answer is yes. I want to build a life with you, whether that's in your house or mine or somewhere new entirely. I want to wake up next to you and share breakfast with you and argue about what book to read together next. I want all of it, Harold. I want us. The smile that spread across his face was radiant. Are you sure? Are you absolutely certain? I'm certain. For the first time in months, I'm completely certain about something. I laughed, surprising myself. I'm 67 years old, and I'm madly in love with you, and I don't care who approves or disapproves. This is my life, and I choose to live it with you. Harold lifted me off my feet and spun me around right there on my front porch, both of us laughing like teenagers. When he set me down, his expression grew serious again. Maggie Reynolds, you have just made me the happiest man alive. And you, I said, reaching up to kiss him again, have just reminded me what it feels like to be truly alive. That night, as I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. She was glowing with happiness, her eyes bright with anticipation for the future. She looked like someone who had remembered how to hope. Before I turned off the lights, I sat on the edge of my bed and spoke to Robert one last time as a widow. I'm gonna be happy, Rob. I whispered to the quiet room. I'm gonna love again, and be loved again. And I think you'd be proud of me for having the courage to do it. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't have limits, that hearts can expand rather than divide. I'll never stop loving you. But I'm also not going to stop living because you're gone. The silence that followed felt like a blessing, like permission, like the gentle encouragement of a husband who had always wanted the best for his wife. Tomorrow, I would start planning a new life with Harold. Tonight, I would simply hold close the miracle of this second chance, this unexpected gift of love after loss. Our first night as an acknowledged couple had indeed changed everything. It had changed me from a widow into a woman in love, from someone marking time until death into someone eager to embrace whatever years lay ahead. And it was, I realized as I drifted off to sleep, only the beginning. 3 months later, I stood in Harold's kitchen, our kitchen now, watching him make coffee with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the space we'd slowly transformed from his bachelor refuge into our shared home. The decision to move in together had been easier than either of us expected. Harold's house was larger and had a beautiful garden that reminded me of Emma, while my house held too many memories of Robert's illness and death. We'd spent weeks carefully blending our belongings, my grandmother's china alongside Emma's crystal, Robert's books sharing shelf space with Harold's teaching materials, our wedding photos displayed with equal honor on the mantelpiece. Penny for your thoughts, Harold said, sliding a cup of coffee across the breakfast table to me. I was just thinking about how different everything is from 6 months ago, I said, settling into what had become my chair. How different I am. Harold sat down across from me, reaching for my hand in the gesture that had become our morning ritual. Different how? 6 months ago, I thought my story was over. I thought the best of my life was behind me, and all I had to look forward to was managing my grief and waiting for the end. I squeezed his fingers gently. Now I wake up every morning excited about what we might do together, what we might discover, what adventures lie ahead. It hadn't all been smooth sailing. Sarah had needed several long conversations before she'd accepted that Harold wasn't taking advantage of me, and even now she remained cautiously supportive rather than enthusiastic. Jim had been icily polite when we'd announced our decision to live together, though his wife Carol had privately told me she thought I deserved happiness. Michael, on the other hand, had surprised everyone by flying out from Atlanta specifically to meet Harold. "Mom," he'd said after spending an afternoon with us, "I haven't seen you this happy since before Dad got sick." Harold, "You're all right by me." The biggest surprise had come from Harold's daughter Rebecca. When we'd driven to meet her and the twins, I'd been terrified that she'd see me as an interloper trying to replace her mother. Instead, she'd hugged me warmly and whispered, "Thank you for bringing my father back to life." "What's on our agenda today?" Harold asked, interrupting my reverie. I smiled, consulting the small calendar we kept on the table. We'd fallen into the habit of planning our days together, no longer content to let time simply pass. "The travel agent is expecting us at 2 to finalize our Ireland trip." "Ah yes, the grand adventure." Harold's eyes lit up with the same excitement I felt whenever we discussed our plans. 3 weeks in Ireland and Scotland, staying in bed and breakfasts, driving the countryside, tracing your Robert's family history and visiting Emma's ancestral home. It had been Harold's idea to frame the trip as a pilgrimage honoring both our spouses. Rather than feeling like we were betraying their memories, we'd come to see the journey as a way of carrying their dreams forward while creating new ones of our own. "Are you nervous?" I asked. "About traveling together for 3 weeks?" Harold chuckled, terrified. "What if you discover I snore? What if I'm a terrible navigator? What if we run out of things to talk about?" "Then we'll figure it out together," I said simply. That's what couples do. The word couples still felt new and wonderful on my tongue. At 60, 8 and 71, we were proof that it was never too late to fall in love, never too late to start over, never too late to choose courage over comfort. After breakfast, I walked through the house that had become our sanctuary, marveling at how seamlessly our lives had merged. In the living room, Harold's favorite reading chair sat beside the window, positioned so he could see Emma's roses in the garden. On the bookshelf, our volumes were intermingled now, his Shakespeare beside my Jane Austen, Robert's mystery novels next to Emma's cookbooks. The bedroom we shared still felt like a miracle to me. For 42 years, I'd shared a bed with Robert, and after his death, I'd been certain I'd never be comfortable sleeping beside another person. But Harold's gentle presence had made the transition natural. He was a quiet sleeper, and I'd grown to love the sound of his steady breathing, the warmth of his arm around me in the early morning hours. We still talked about our deceased spouses regularly, but the conversations had evolved from painful recollections to fond memories we could share without guilt. Harold would tell me about Emma's terrible singing voice and how he'd pretended to enjoy her off-key serenades. I'd share stories about Robert's disastrous attempts at home improvement and how I'd learned to hide the tools before he could cause too much damage. They would have liked each other, had become our frequent conclusion, and I believed it was true. The phone rang as I was dusting our shared photo display, and I smiled when I saw Linda Chen's number. Our former volunteer coordinator had become a close friend, delighting in taking credit for introducing us. "Maggie, how are you and Harold settling in?" "Wonderfully, Linda. We're about to book our trip to Ireland." "That's marvelous. Listen, I have a favor to ask. We're having a volunteer appreciation dinner next month, and I was hoping you and Harold might be willing to speak about your experience. Not the romantic part necessarily, but about how volunteering can lead to meaningful connections and community." I found myself nodding before she'd finished speaking. "Would be honored, Linda." After I hung up, I realized how much my perspective on sharing our story had changed. In the beginning, I'd been embarrassed by the attention our relationship drew, uncomfortable with being seen as the widow who'd moved on too quickly. Now I wanted to share our story, to encourage other people that it was never too late to choose hope over fear, connection over isolation, love over loneliness. Harold returned from his morning walk around the neighborhood just as I was finishing my cleaning. His cheeks were pink from the cool air, and he was carrying a small bouquet of late-season flowers he'd clearly purchased from the corner market. "What's the occasion?" I asked as he presented them with a flourish. "Do I need an occasion to bring flowers to the woman I love?" I accepted the bouquet with a smile, inhaling their sweet fragrance. "Harold Mitchell, you are a hopeless romantic." "Hopelessly in love. You mean?" As I arranged the flowers in a vase, Harold came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Maggie, do you ever regret it?" "Any of it?" I leaned back against his chest, solid and warm and reassuring. "Which part? Falling in love with you, moving in together, choosing to build a new life instead of just mourning the old one?" "Any of it. All of it." I turned in his arms so I could look directly into his eyes. "Harold, I regret a lot of things in my life. I regret not traveling more when Robert and I were young. I regret not calling my mother more often before she died. I regret not taking more pictures, not saving more letters, not appreciating ordinary moments that turned out to be extraordinary." I reached up to cup his face in my hands. "But I don't regret a single moment of loving you. I don't regret taking the risk, facing the judgment, or choosing hope over fear. Loving you has been the bravest and best thing I've done since Robert died." Harold kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of the tenderness that had characterized our entire relationship. When we broke apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you, Maggie Reynolds. More than I thought I could ever love anyone again. And I love you, Harold Mitchell. More than I ever imagined possible." That afternoon, as we sat in the travel agent's office finalizing our Ireland itinerary, I found myself thinking about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. She'd been convinced that the best parts of her life were over, that love was something that belonged to the past, that taking risks was for younger people with more time to recover from mistakes. Now, looking at our planned route through Ireland and Scotland, at the list of bed and breakfasts where we'd stay, at the ancestral sites we'd visit in honor of both Robert and Emma, I realized that the best parts of my life might just be beginning. "What do you think?" Harold asked, studying the itinerary. 3 weeks of being tourists together. "Think we can handle it?" "I think," I said, taking his hand across the travel agent's desk. "We can handle anything together." That evening, we attended our weekly book club at the community center, where our relationship had begun. As we discussed that month's selection, a novel about second chances and new beginnings, I caught Harold's eye across the circle and saw him smile. After the meeting, Linda pulled us aside. "You two have become quite the inspiration. You know, we've had 3 other members ask me about setting up their widowed friends, hoping to recreate your success story." "We're not a success story yet," Harold said with a laugh. "Check back with us after we've survived 3 weeks of traveling together." "Oh, you're a success story all right," Linda replied firmly. "You're proof that it's never too late to choose love over fear, that hearts can expand rather than replace, that the best chapters of our lives don't have to be the earliest ones." Driving home that night, Harold reached over to take my hand. "Linda's right, you know. We are a success story, are we? Think about it. 6 months ago, we were both existing rather than living, going through the motions of daily life without really feeling alive. Now look at us planning trips, making decisions together, building a future we're both excited about." I squeezed his hand, thinking about the truth of what he'd said. "You know what I think our real success is?" "What's that?" "We didn't let fear win. We could have stayed in our separate houses, protecting ourselves from the possibility of loss or disappointment or judgment. Instead, we chose to be vulnerable, to take risks, to believe that love was still possible even after we thought our stories were finished." When we got home, Harold made us both a cup of tea, and we sat in our living room, surrounded by the beautiful blending of our 2 lives. The grandfather clock I'd brought from my house chimed 10 times, and Harold looked at me with that gentle smile that had become my favorite sight in the world. "Ready for bed, my love?" "Ready," I said, and the word carried so much more meaning than just the end of another day. As we climbed the stairs together, I thought about how miraculous it was to have someone to share the quiet rituals of evening with again. Someone to brush my teeth beside, to discuss the day's events with, to hold close as we drifted off to sleep. That night, as I lay in Harold's arms listening to his peaceful breathing, I whispered a prayer of gratitude to the universe that had brought us together, to Robert who had taught me how to love completely, and to Emma who had taught Harold the same lesson. Tomorrow we would continue building our life together, making breakfast, sharing the newspaper, working in the garden Emma had planted and I was learning to tend. In 2 weeks, we would board a plane for Ireland, embarking on the adventure that would be our first major journey as a couple. But tonight, I was simply grateful for the miracle of second chances, for the courage to say yes when love knocked on my door again, for the reminder that the heart's capacity for happiness knows no age limit. Our first night as an acknowledged couple had changed everything, just as I'd said in the beginning. It had changed me from a woman marking time into a woman making plans. It had changed Harold from a man going through the motions into a man fully engaged with life. It had changed us both from people who thought their stories were ending into people who realized they were just beginning a new chapter. And as I drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man I loved, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, family concerns, health issues, the simple complications of blending 2 lives that had been lived separately for so long, we would face them together. Because that's what love does at any age. It gives you a reason to be brave, a partner for the adventure, and the absolute certainty that you're not walking through life alone. At 68 and 71, Harold and I had learned that it's never too late to fall in love, never too late to start over, and never too late to choose joy over sorrow, hope over fear, togetherness over solitude. Our first night really had changed everything, and we were just getting started. Epilogue: 1 year later, I'm writing this from a small cafe in County Cork, Ireland, where Harold is attempting to decipher our rental car's GPS while I sip the most perfect cup of tea I've ever tasted. We've been married for 3 months now, a simple ceremony in Harold's garden with just our children and closest friends present, and we're finally taking the honeymoon trip we'd planned for so long. Yesterday we visited the village where Robert's great-grandparents once lived, and tomorrow we'll drive to Scotland to see the cottage where Emma's family originated. It feels perfect, somehow, that our first trip as husband and wife is one that honors both the love we've lost and the love we've found. Harold just looked up from the GPS and smiled at me, the same gentle smile that made me fall in love with him in the first place, and I'm reminded once again that the heart's capacity for happiness truly knows no limits. At 69 and 72, we're proof that the best love stories don't always begin with, "Once upon a time." Sometimes they begin with, "I never thought I'd feel this way again." Sometimes they begin with the courage to answer when love knocks a second time.